Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar presentation. We are very excited to have you all on the line with us today. My name is Brooke, and I'm one of the marketing specialists here at Edmentum, and I will be with you throughout the presentation behind the scenes for our presentation on assessment-driven instruction to power learning. But before we jump into the presentation, I just want to point out a few things on the attendee interface. Right now, we're looking at an example of the GoToWebinar attendee control panel that everybody should be seeing on the right-hand side of their screen. I just kind of want to jump in this. We really want you to participate in today's events, so I'm going to go through a few things in this panel. By selecting the orange arrow, you're going to be able to open and close your control panel. The audio pane is going to provide you with your audio information. By default, everybody has joined the webinar with their microphone and speakers. However, a microphone is not needed because you will be muted throughout the presentation. But if you are having difficulties with your speakers, you can also join by telephone. If you select the telephone radio button, we've provided a toll-free number and an access code. You will not need an audio pin since you are muted, so you don't have to worry about that. And you also have the ability to send us questions through the question pane. So I'm going to send a test chat out right now. I just want to make sure you guys can see my screen and you guys can hear me. Please say hello, introduce yourself, tell us what school you're with, what district you're in. We really want you to interact with us today, so please go ahead and chat in at this time. And like I mentioned before, I will be here with you throughout the webinar behind the scenes, so please send us any questions that you guys have, and we'll either answer them during the presentation or we will go over them at the end of the webinar during our Q&A session. And as a final reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and everyone will automatically receive a link to that recording tomorrow afternoon by email. All right, so on with the show. I'd like to introduce you all to our wonderful presenters today. We have with us Renaissance Product Marketing Manager, Gretchen Hansen, and Edmentum Service Program Manager, Tony Skauge, on the line with us, and they have a great presentation. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to pass my screen over to Gretchen.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited to join you guys today. My name's Gretchen Hansen. I'm with Renaissance, and what I wanted to talk about today is to talk about how we're using STAR assessments to power instruction and learning with wonderful partners like Edmentum. We've built this really great relationship together and integrating in a really deep way to help you take that assessment data that's so valuable to you as you're kind of figuring out where your students are and what they need to do as far as their future instruction and practice goes, and help you use that assessment data to drive that. So to get started, what I wanted to do is spend a few minutes just talking about the STAR assessments and what they are and how you can use them, and then we'll talk about our integration together, and then we'll turn it over to Tony to show how that assessment data is really driving some exciting stuff within Edmentum's Exact Path. So what you see here on the screen is the Renaissance STAR 360 dashboard. And on the left-hand side, you will go ahead and see that we do have assessments, all of our assessment products there. In the middle are some planning tools and instructional practice tools that Renaissance offers. And then to the right, we have a whole host of reports that are available. We're not going to spend too much time on the middle and right sections today because I primarily want to spend our time talking about assessment and the capabilities that STAR offers. So Renaissance STAR 360 is an interim informative assessment suite. It's designed for grades pre-K through 12, and you can use it for multiple purposes, whether that's screening or monitoring or pre-test, etc. Within Renaissance STAR 360, we have STAR Early Literacy, we have STAR Reading, we have STAR Math, and all three of those are also available in Spanish. So you can see those scores side by side to identify if there's a skill gap or if really it's a language issue on a skill-by-skill basis. STAR 360 also includes STAR Custom, which is it's a formative suite that lets you really drill into individual and specific skills to test those individually. So you can assign them just like kind of a quiz to really see how students are doing on individual skills or sub-skills. STAR assessments are typically provided between 3 and 4 times a year. They can be done more frequently if you are using them for progress monitoring purposes. And it's really convenient to do that because every STAR test can be done within approximately 20 minutes or less. So how do we do that? STAR uses computer adaptive technology to proactively determine how students are doing. So they'll ask them a question. The student gets the question right. The next question will be a little bit harder. They get the question wrong. The next question will be a little bit easier. And so as the student goes through the test, within about 34 questions or around 20 minutes, we're going to start to really narrow in with a high level of reliability where exactly that student is and what skills they are competent in and where they need a little more help. This is all really based upon the learning progressions that Renaissance has developed over the past 30 years of really analyzing student performance and student growth and how kind of these skills build upon each other to guide them toward that complete mastery. We have complete learning progressions built for both reading and for math. And they are really the foundation that's going to be guiding not only the students' progression when they're using STAR, but also the integration that we've developed with Edmentum. So when your students take that STAR assessment, we're able to know exactly where they're going to fall on that learning progression so that we know what skills they are feeling good about and what skills they're ready for next. And that's going to really drive that next step of, okay, well, what instruction, what practice, what learning paths do we need to put each individual student on? Every skill is aligned to state standards, so each year we're making sure that we're always current. We always go back to those state standards or Common Core standards to make sure that those skills are updated, they are aligned, so no matter what you're using in your school or district, you can rest assured that you are going to be getting the right direction so that you can continue to work toward those benchmarks that you're striving toward. Every skill is also mapped to our partner content. So this is a really important part and really the heart of the integration that we have with Edmentum and our other Growth Alliance partners. For every skill that's in our learning progression, in our universal skill pool, we go ahead and we sit down with Edmentum's content team and determine how does this skill line up to the content that you have, so that when we provide that information over with the STAR score, that's really going to be able to drive that next step of instruction and practice that you're going to see within Edmentum. Renaissance STAR 360 also does automatic grouping and benchmarking. So as your students get those STAR scores, we're able to group them automatically into whether they're above average, they're at benchmark, they're below benchmark, etc. It's really easy for you as the teacher to manipulate those groups and move students around as you see fit, but the system will automatically go ahead and provide those groupings for you so that you can have them available really quite easily. So once you have your STAR scores, your students have all taken their assessment tests, you know where they are, you know what they're ready for next, and this is where our integration with Edmentum really is going to come into play. And so now we're going to turn it over to Tony to talk about that integration and what it looks like within Edmentum.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Gretchen, for that wonderful overview of Renaissance, and we're really excited about this integration and everything that it can do to really support your students and your staff. So let's take a moment and detail in a bit more depth about how this integration actually works. What's really unique about this integration is you can really start this process by using those STAR results that Gretchen just mentioned to create unique or customized learning pathways for students with content that creates from a kindergarten level all the way up to a 12th grade level in Exact Path. And then your students can then jump into Exact Path and start to work on those individualized learning paths to not only highlight strengths and weaknesses, but also provide targeted content where students can do it in hopes of remediation or supplemental education, or even to help them move forward. And throughout this entire process, the educators will receive real-time reporting, and the students will be able to see and track their progress as they move through these learning paths step for step. We really work to pull in those Renaissance STAR assessment results to create those unique learning paths so that you can be sure that your students are getting the content that they need moving forward. So let's start by talking a little bit about, at a high level at least, how the integration process works to make this a really seamless transition from STAR results to actual customized learning paths. So let's start by saying which assessments actually integrate. Well, to begin with, our STAR Early Literacy, our STAR Reading, and STAR Math assessments can all create or generate customized learning paths within ExactPath. And it really begins with enabling a data sharing process within Renaissance. So we'll walk through these processes here in just a moment, but once you've enabled that data sharing, you can then begin to map those Edmentum, you can map in Edmentum the scheduling or testing windows to set up an automatic sync process. Now, once students have completed those STAR assessments, that sync takes place, and now you're already beginning those customized or those individualized learning paths. This process, and I used the word earlier seamlessly, I'll use that again, is really designed to be seamless so that when those students are completed taking those STAR assessments, students then have the opportunity to begin working on those individualized or customized learning paths moving forward. So let's dig just a little deeper to give you a little bit better frame of reference here. And so what you're looking at here is really where the integration begins by enabling a data sharing process with Renaissance. So this screen here shows within ExactPath and Edmentum the STAR account mapping process. And it really begins with beginning with a customer or Renaissance customer ID. So once you've gone through and gotten or received that customer ID after checking with Renaissance, you can input that Renaissance ID here to begin this process. After you've gone through and put that customer ID in, you can then move to the next step that we talked briefly about, which is going through and setting up the testing windows. So on the STAR Data Sync page within Edmentum's administrative interface, you can go through and create your testing windows, and you can have up to 5 to begin that automatic sync. This process, again, is really designed in a way to be as seamless as possible. And the thought process here is we want to make this process as easy as possible for you. So to that end, we have an award-winning customer support team that can go as far as, screen connecting with you to make sure this process is as easy for you as possible. And I also know that our teammates at the Renaissance also have a terrific amount of resources, including PDFs, that they can help share instructions on how to do this as well. We really want to help you get this process set up and really going as fast as possible. On this last page, you can see once you've established and gotten that sync intact, and you can always come back and look and determine, okay, where in that process in the history did this sync go through, and you can review that process to determine which of your students were given those customized learning paths, really getting all the information you need to ensure that your students are getting the learning path that they need as they begin to work. Just going back to this process again, it is designed to be a simple, streamlined process in terms of setup. But remember, we're here to help in any way that we possibly can to make sure that this process really is exactly what you're looking for. So we've talked just a little bit about the syncing process and the way that you can begin that integration between Renaissance STAR assessments and Edmentum's ExactPath. Let's go through and talk a little bit about how the actual skills alignment process works. So to really kind of level set for you, Edmentum and Renaissance really worked really collaboratively to map all of the skills of the Renaissance learning progression to skills for the ExactPath learning progression and all the domains in between. Now, the Renaissance assessment generates 1 score per subject, which then maps to 1 skill on the Renaissance learning progression. Now, it sends those skills for multiple domains for each ExactPath learning path. Now, that's pretty deep, but really helps you understand that we really went through and critically mapped each one of those skills to ensure that students are getting exactly content that's reflective of how they score on their STAR assessments in their customized or individualized learning path. Now, what's also unique here is you have content inside of ExactPath that really begins at a kindergarten level all the way up through a 12th grade level. So if you have students who fall in certain areas, let's say by definition, you have a group of 6th graders that you're working with, but you know some of those students have skill deficits that might present themselves, let's say in math at a 2nd grade level. You would have the opportunity with this tool to go through and get content that begins in a customized or individualized learning path at that 2nd grade level. So you really know that the students can begin to work their way up to try and get back on the grade level. Now, the opposite there is true as well. I go back to that example where I have a 6th grader student, but who's actually maybe operating in math at a 9th grade level, you also know that you have skills or the ability to provide, targeted based lessons for students and skills that begin at a 9th grade level. So you can also help those students differentiate content, both not only at a lower level, but also at a higher level as well. This tight alignment of our learning progressions is really what helps to guarantee that each student gets a unique and comprehensive learning path that can help drive them forward. And it's the action step, right? It's the now what of what can really help move those students forward. You get these great results back from the Renaissance STAR assessments, right? Now what do I do with them? How do I begin to work with the 30 plus students I have in my room to make sure that each student is getting precisely the content that they need? This tool will help foster that and help give you that action step, that now what. We've got a chance to look at a little bit of the process for setting up this alignment. Now let's kind of dig in a little bit to talk a little bit about, okay, what would it look like in the actual platform? What does ExactPath look like step for step? Let's jump in there right now. So, at Edmentum, we're really committed to the mantra of simple technology. And to that end, we've really focused on creating learning opportunities, or in this case, interfaces for students that are really representative of where they're at instructionally. Within ExactPath, we've offered really 3 separate user interfaces, so that when students jump in to begin their learning path, it's representative of where they're actually at. So you can see here, for instance, a K2 skill level, right? This is where we've kind of set the stage here with a fun underwater theme that students will move on, and a central dashboard that they can move through. In addition to some unique themes there, we've gone through and put in what we call an easy login functionality, where any teacher can go through and set up that you can easily go through and have your younger students log in by, instead of having them log in by typing in their login credentials for students, especially at a lower level who might not have those letter recognition skills quite yet, they can log in using a combination of pictures and symbols to find their name, which ideally streamlines that process for them. In grades 2 through 5 and 6 through 8, you can see the interface gets a bit more refined, but again, it's designed to make sure that dashboard for students is front and center in all of these, so that students know exactly where they need to go to access those learning paths and stay engaged. We know how critical student engagement is. And that really is a central theme as we're moving through here, making sure that students throughout this entire process are engaged in this platform so that they continue to move. Now, once students log into their accounts, as you can see on this slide, then they begin to navigate through their customized or individualized learning paths. And this to me is really that action step. And you probably heard me say that already a couple times today, but it really truly is that. It's the now what, right? I've got these great assessment results back that are valid, that are reliable. Now what do I do with them? Like, how do I turn that data into action? And this is where kind of the rubber meets the road with those adaptive learning paths. Now, each one of these learning paths are tailored, right? They're customized, and they're based upon those assessment scores. So they will place students either on, above, or below grade levels, but precisely in alignment with that skills progression that we talked about earlier. Now, each learning path, right, is designed so that students can drive their own academic journey and really select skills as they're moving through this content at their own pace. So we're trying to give that degree of autonomy or student agency that's so critical to blended learning in this platform as students move through. Now, each student's learning path is revealed just a few lessons at a time. We try and give students roughly 4 lessons at a time at once to move through. And at a quick glance, one student's learning path might look and feel completely different than the student sitting next to him or her, but that's by design, right? We want to give really differentiated, meaningful content to students who need it, who ultimately need that content as they're going through. You can start to think about all the different ways that you can utilize this, right? This tool can be used as a terrific Tier 2, Tier 3 differentiation technique. It's ideal for a blended learning or a station rotation implementation if you have a group of students who have varied needs and abilities. This is a terrific place to place those students. And if you really put yourself for a moment in the shoes of an educator who is looking back at 35 plus students in their classroom, all of those students have varied skills, abilities, and needs. you start to realize how difficult it is to start to differentiate or create unique differentiation techniques for students. That doesn't take a ton of time, that is not only valid and reliable, but more importantly, is aligned to your state standards. So this is where a tool like this can really help mitigate some of the challenges that educators face when it comes to providing content and instruction that is truly differentiated as they move through. So I discussed the learning path here at a high level, but I guess if I were you on this call right now, my next natural question would be, all right, so what's in a learning path, or what does it look like? How does it work? So our learning paths are unique in the sense that they follow pretty traditional, instructional flow here, and one that we know is proven. The learning path is really kind of backed by this high-quality, instructionally sound curriculum that is created by our own in-house subject matter experts. And I'll kind of walk you through what this looks like. So students begin their learning paths with a tutorial or direct instruction of some kind. This is your initial jump into the lesson. So let's say, for instance, I'm working on two-digit multiplication. That's the first time I'm working on this skill. I might not have any prerequisite information. This direct instruction tutorial is designed to walk me through that process. In most cases, the tutorial is anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes in length, and it has embedded audio and translation functionality here as well. Now, once students finish that tutorial, we want to give them an opportunity to cement what they were taught in the initial tutorial, to back that process up, and that's where the practice activities come into play. This is a chance for students to really solidify what was taught in the initial tutorial, that direct instruction. And now, once students have completed that 10-minute or so exercise, they have an opportunity to demonstrate what they've learned using a mastery test. The mastery test is unique in the sense that it's hyper-specific to the tutorial, the direct instruction that was taught right here. But the caveat here is we want to make sure there's some mastery-based elements to this. So we've set the threshold here at an 80% level for students to be able to complete this mastery test out of roughly 5 questions at an 80% level or better, to move on to the next set, to the next lesson. Now, if students don't, this lesson will lock and kick them back down the tutorial, and they have an opportunity to go back to that process again to unlock a different version of that assessment. Now, all of this, right, you can control as an educator. So if you have a student with an IEP, for instance, that calls for a different threshold, you can override that 80% threshold and help those students move forward. So this really is, you've heard me say the now what, but that's really what it is. And as important as it is to focus on the learning path, we also know that you want to make sure students are moving through this process, that you have some measures or indicators of where students are at a more global level. So we kind of didn't want to stop there. And so we added in a progress monitoring tool in this platform as well. And I think this is also in part what separates this tool from others, is the fact that not only do you get customized or individualized learning paths that are representative of students' skills and abilities as they demonstrated on the Renaissance STAR assessments, but you also get embedded progress monitoring as students move through. So what happens is as students move through those 4 skills that we talked about earlier, after those 4 skills, automatically, organically, a progress monitoring assessment will pop up for students to go through and demonstrate that they've achieved mastery. They can show you that what they're working on here, I've learned, and I feel comfortable to move on to the next set of skills. So it really helps to inform and adapt that learning path. Let's take that a step further too. If a student is moving through content within their learning path, and let's say they're moving through this process and they fail this mastery quiz, we've also gone ahead and built into the platform what we call building blocks. Building blocks are unique in the sense that building blocks provide students an opportunity to work on content that is roughly 1 skill or grade level lower than the content they were initially given. So the thought process here is, I don't want you to keep working on the same content, right? You expect a different result for that content. So I'm going to provide you with an automatic lesson that is roughly 1 skill or grade level lower to try and remediate you back up to the initial one you were given. And the thought process there is once you've completed that, you can work on the initial one and move forward. Start to think of that now as a tier 3 differentiation, right? Now you're starting to see how this can really help streamline some of the processes and practices that that teachers work with students on every single day. Now, as you're starting to think about this and think about all the, the differentiation techniques, the tool, I often get asked by educators, okay, so, how long do they have to work on this, or is it proven? Does it work? And you know what? To understand about how we've come to this, we've thought about this at a really deep level, and we focused on ways that we can go through and ensure that students working on this, focus time in this, is going to contribute significantly to higher student outcomes. At Edmentum, we really focus or subscribe to the mastery learning model, and this research framework really centered around personalized learning. So you have a better idea of how that looks. And we know empirically that students who spend time in exact path, right, will move in the direction that we want them to go. And it really just makes sense if you think about it. Students fundamentally need exposure to the skills that they don't already know. So if I'm a student who's either multiple grade levels below or multiple grade levels above, I need exposure to content that is at my skill and ability level. And I need as much exposure to that content as is possible. So the more exposure, more differentiated exposure to content you're able to give students, right, the more growth you're going to see moving forward. So it's something to think about as you're going through. Direct instruction is essential and it's critical, but at the same time, you want to make sure you're giving differentiated content so that your students can continue to either A, try and keep pace with the differentiated instruction, with the direct instruction you're giving, or B, right, accelerate in the other direction as well. So now, quite frankly, it's cool and it's fun as I'm sure these slides are to look at. In my estimation, it's always much better to just get into the platform and take a look at these. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've gone and pulled up a demo account for us as we're going through. So what I'd like to go through is dive into some of these pieces. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the knowledge map visualization, some of the ways that you can go through and start to look at some of these platforms to understand really what you can do with this tool when you're working with your students moving forward. So the first thing I want to show you is a feature or a functionality where taking the data that you receive from your students' Renaissance STAR assessments and turning that into action is so critical. So we focus right here, and I'm going to show you what we call our knowledge map. The knowledge map is such a unique thing in the sense that this is an interactive live view of where your students might be at as they move through their learning paths. So let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing here, and I'll walk you through kind of step for step. And this is kind of where you take the data into action. So I'm looking at math content. On the left-hand side, you see my skill legend here. You can see where some of my students have scored above certain skills on the Renaissance STAR assessment. On the left-hand side, you can see my students' names here, all the students in my class. And across the top, what's so unique is you see every single skill, okay, and every single domain in kindergarten all the way up, okay, through 12th grade content. So when I'm working with folks who maybe aren't educators, I love this view only because I think it gives such a great visualization for really how difficult it is to be an educator, right? So you might have 30 plus students in your class, but they're working all across the board in terms of levels where they're at. So it's a really difficult challenge to meet all of those students' needs every single hour of every day that you have them in relation to instructional time. This tool helps you bridge that gap a little bit. So if you start to look across, these blue blocks indicate the first 4 lessons that those students are given as they move through. Now, again, for educators and administrators on this call, I taught in the classroom for a number of years. I'm sure you can relate. Just sitting in a PLC, in a grade level team meeting, in a conference room with other educators, and you work to put up post-it notes that showed where your students are on, above, or below grade level, and those post-it notes seemingly were everywhere on the wall, and you use those post-it notes to try and inform this, the instructions you're going to give for the next, couple weeks or months. That being said, that the data you were doing, the way you're aggregating that information, typically came from old data, right? It came from district benchmarks, or it came from state assessments that in some cases were months old. And more importantly, when you got done putting all those post-it notes up on the wall, they didn't move with you, right? As you started to move through your instructional cadence and you started to deliver direct instruction, those post-it notes stood still. So we really want to make sure that we could go through and adapt with that. So what this tool does is, as students move through their learning path, you can not only see what areas, okay, where your students have either A, failed skills and received building blocks that we talked about earlier, or where they're being really successful, where they've mastered certain skills. Now, what's also really cool is if you're curious and want to see the intersection, right? I want to see where that intersection is between a standard, a domain, and a specific skill. You can click on any one of these icons above to see. I want to see my specific state standard. I want to see the domain with which it actually occurs in, and more importantly, I want to know the skill. If all that you get from your reporting is the domain level information, okay, you should expect more. It's not enough, because if you sit down across the table during a parent-teacher conference and you say your student is really struggling on number and operations, the parent is not going to have any discrete idea of what you're talking about, right? But if you went through and said, you know what, we're really struggling on number and operations, more specifically, we're struggling on the topic of division, okay, but don't worry. Right, we've gone through and we've got content that we can support these students with. In this case, it's differentiated for those students moving forward. So you can really get an idea of where that intersection between standards, domains, and skills exists. Now, you would say, well, I really want to see what these students are working on. So you can click on any one of these icons, right, to show what lessons those students are working on. So in this case, I can see here's the tutorial, here's the application, which is cementing what that student is working on, and here's the mastery quiz, that 5-question quiz we talked about. And you can also see where the student works on the progress monitoring assessment in relation to this specific skill. So you can say, boy, you know what? I noticed that the student is struggling in division. We might have to look at some other avenues, including giving additional assignments or content within here, or using the grouping functionality to create some unique learning experiences for students. There's just so much you can do here when you look at this learning path and understand that all of this content that's being given to students is reflective of their needs. Now, let's say that you have a student who's going through this, and you know what, for whatever reason, this lesson did not resonate, in this case with Nora. Maybe you say, you know what, I'd really like to go through and just give a worksheet, right? I want to give a different medium, a different modality for the student to work on. You can assign out worksheets specifically to those students. Or you know what, maybe you're fortunate and have Study Island as a resource at your school or site as well, and you want to find correlated activities to that. Here's another great way to find what activities correlate directly to that. Or maybe you just want to do an anticipatory set lesson that includes a Khan Academy video, just to give the student a different way to be exposed to the content. We want to give as many opportunities for students to be successful, and one way to do that is give as many options for content as possible, and that's what we're doing here. So beyond that customized or individualized learning path, we've also put in student resources, again, that you can assign out. That being said, we also felt like it was critical to help educators as they're moving through this process as well. Now, I think back now to when I was a first-year teacher, and I, in some ways, shudder, but at the other time, I also know most first-year teachers, including myself, it was an experience of what I call treading water, right? It was a day-to-day. And there were lessons that I was teaching when I taught 6th grade that, to be quite frank, I hadn't been exposed to for years. And so I really felt like some of those activities I didn't have a great grasp of. So we put in instructor resources here where you can go through and say, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to be teaching long division. I haven't done that for so long. I want to get a refresher myself. Or I want a different project-based learning activity or a team activity just to mix it up a little bit. This is a great tool to look and find additional instructor resources that go beyond the learning path and go beyond what you're doing. And not only are you getting high-quality content that you can work on, but it's not requiring me to sit on a Tuesday night at 11 o'clock at night and Google, and try and figure out things. I know that I'm getting content that's directly correlated to standards that I'm working on, right? I know it's exactly what it needs to be. If you want to see, again, the intersection to the standard, you can go below here as well. So this visualization goes beyond just the fact that this student is getting a really targeted, leveled piece of content that is directly reflective of not only their skills, their abilities, but also where those students are at, because we felt it really critical to go through and provide content really in 2 ways. So we have content that is not only designed for students in roughly kindergarten through 5th grade, we also provide the same content with a visualization for students in 6th through 12th grade. And so what that really means is, if I'm a student working, and I'll go back to this example, division, okay, let's say I'm an 8th grader who's struggling in division. And this has been a problem for me for my entire education career, but I'm committed to making a difference and changing that. If I sat down and work on content that has 4th grade level, duckies and bunnies, for instance, right? My engagement level is going to go away in a hurry, right? I'm not going to want to look at that. So what we did is we created content that mirrors, right? That mirrors the same skills, division as an example, but it will look like any other piece of content that an 8th grader or 9th grader might be working through. So it won't have those duckies and bunnies. It sounds like a really small thing, but it's actually a really big thing. Because if you are a student who is fundamentally low, you don't need to be reminded of that as you're going through the content. You need content that's reflective of that. So we've taken it a step further, and we'll look at that here in just a moment. So I go back to what I mentioned earlier. This knowledge map to me, I think, is one of the coolest features, only because as a former educator myself, sitting and creating those Post-it notes and going through this, that was a stagnant exercise that didn't move with me. And this tool does the opposite. It's designed to move. You can sit in PLC data team meetings now and really fundamentally look at this and say, how can I adjust my scope and sequence, my instructional cadence to be reflective of where my students are at? So this tool automatically gets populated really as soon as that data comes in. Now, from a data perspective, the other questions I'd be having is, how else can I look at my results? So we've also built in what we call class results, right? So you can start to look at your results as an educator based upon where your students are at. So if I wanted to look at my Renaissance Star exam assessment results and I want to see where my students falling holistically, I can get some overarching domain level information here to say, oh, okay, I can see where my students are at. I can start to sort and filter against that. And this information, quite frankly, is something that you should just expect, right? You should be able to see this information at a quick glance to understand, okay, how am I going to, again, orientate instruction, or how am I going to go through and provide some unique learning activities for my students? So you can look at the data from a class level, or you can say, you know what, as great as that is, I just want to look at an individual student report. So you can also then go through and say, all right, I'm going to look in this case at Ben. We've created individual student reports that are designed to help you craft a narrative as an educator or administrator about where your student is at. So you can first start to say, all right, this is math. Where is my student at? Okay, well, I can look to see versus STAR Assessment 1 or versus 2, where my students are at instructionally. How much time do they spend on the test? The next thing you can do as an educator is help communicate to parents or to the student, okay, here's where we're at. Let's see how we got to where we're at, right? Well, here's where we're at right now. Okay, you can see that some students are he's doing great in this case. Ben is doing terrific in number and operations and measurement and data. But I know where your eyes are going, right? Algebra and expressions and geometry, but don't worry, right? We haven't got to that maybe yet in our instructional scope and sequence. We will. That might be a topic that we cover when we get to the spring, but at least students demonstrate some prerequisite or early knowledge of that, and we can build upon that. We can make sure that student gets what they need. So now I've talked about where we're at, right? I've talked about how we got to where we're at. And last but not least, I can say, well, now I need to see where we're going. So now you can start to compare learning paths. You can start to say, well, take a look. When Ben started this learning path, he was working on 3rd grade level concepts, but the second learning path that he worked on, you can see he assessed above that content. He had to practice a couple again, but he's mastered this content. So now I can go down and say, you know what, I noticed he failed this one twice. Don't worry, we put in some additional supports for Ben to make sure he's successful moving forward. It's such a terrific way to say, here's where we started, here's where we've been, and probably the most important question that happens at the end of those parent-teacher conferences is, what's next? What are we doing next? What's the next plan here? So to be able as an educator to say, here's what's next, mom or dad. We need to be working on these 4 skills, okay? Comparing decimals, units of measurement, measuring objects in time. But don't worry, these were already assigned. And this is waiting for Ben in his learning path right now. So tonight, when you go home, you can work with Ben on this. And if you're not sure, if you haven't done comparing decimals since, for 20 plus years and you're not sure where to start, or you have some apprehension around math and helping your student, don't worry. This content is designed for first-time instruction. It's designed to work alongside. So you can sit with your student or with your child and learn along with them. And it's a great way as an educator to say, here's what we're doing next. So we've looked a little bit at the ways you can look at data, the ways that you can go through and understand where your students are maybe at instructionally. To that end, what if you find content, or what if you're saying, boy, I sure would like to give some additional content outside of what we have. We've also built in the ability with an exact path in conjunction to, okay, or alongside that learning path. You can also as an educator say, all right, you know what? I need some specific content today. I'm looking for content that is maybe in speaking and listening. And you can say, I want to look at a specific skill, or I want to look at a specific standard, or I just need to see all the content you have when it relates to speaking and listening. What's so cool about this is now you can go through and say, not only do I have students who might have this in their learning paths, but I might want to assign a specific lesson or two in conjunction or parallel to their learning path as a way to practice or give targeted instructions. I could say, this is my, in this case, it's, language arts, language arts practice, for instance, or however you want to go through and put that together. And then you can select which students you might want in that lesson and assign content, again, that is instructionally appropriate, but again, in conjunction with that student's learning path. So it's another way to take, what you're currently doing from a direct instruction technique standpoint in your classroom and pivot off that and say, I know they're getting tier 2 or tier 3 differentiation content within their learning path, but I also want them to work on something today, whole group, or you know what, I got a sub coming in tomorrow, and I want to make sure I'm giving content that everyone can work on, that's, in conjunction with my on-grade level instruction. I also want it to be tracked, right? I also want to see what my students are doing. So once you've assigned out the content, you can also go into your assignments tab, and you can keep track of, okay, where your students are at and what they're doing. So you can look at any one of ththese to see, I know what my student is up to today, or I know what they're working on. I can track that content in real time as I'm progressing. So the thought process here is we want to go really beyond just what that student has the ability to work on and just give them more content as they're working through, be able to track that in a way that's meaningful so you can, again, ideally adjust instructional techniques to make sure they're getting exactly what they need. So we've looked at a couple different avenues here. Just to circle back, we talked a little bit about the knowledge map as we started today. We dove into, at a pretty deep level, the results report, and then started to dive in even deeper into ways we can give additional content and ways to interpret a student report. The last couple pieces I want to look at in the remaining time we have are, one of these features is what we call teacher-graded activities. Most of the skills are met through lessons that we've looked at earlier, so that tutorial, the application, the mastery test instructional format, but there are some skills that we know that need to be really reviewed by a teacher. So the way I think about that is I want to really see your ability to write a paragraph that relates to plot, or I'm really want to see how your grammar and syntax looks as it relates to moving through your content. To that end, what you can go through and do is you can start to go through and create or assign out what we call teacher-graded activities. So teacher-graded activities organically pop up for students as they move through their learning paths. So you might have your class list on the side. You might be saying, all right, my student, for instance, is moving through their content, and I've noticed they've reached an area where, hey, you know what, Deanna's ready to have this content assigned. So I can see what skill it's correlated to. And I could even go through and say, I got to look at this. And I can preview the content really as though I'm a student, okay, moving through this content. So I can get an idea of what the content will look like. I can preview it as though I'm a student. I can see the rubric that is associated with it. And I can say, all right, I want to see what tasks that student will be given. So in this case, the student's going to be asked to, to go through and draw or write a content. And the best part about this is, as soon as that student is done with this, it's a digital Dropbox format. So now what will happen is the student will go through, submit that via digital Dropbox. The notification will pop up automatically for the teacher, and they can go through and say, oh, this is terrific. I want to review this. Say you did a great job, or you know what, I like where you started here, but we might need a little extra work. I want you to go back and work on this one more time. It's just another way to assess a student's skills and abilities, and it goes outside of a student just having to work through that content. They can assess their writing ability here as well. So it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. We really focus on the entire student and giving the whole child an opportunity to be reflective of all their skills and abilities, and one of those skills that we know are critical are writing skills. So to that end, as students are moving through this content and getting through those pieces, we know engagement is critical, and that's why the content that we have in here, the curriculum that we've built, it is designed to be engaging to move through. That being said, those of us on this call who are educators and administrators know what March and April and May feel like, and you're starting to be like, oh, we got to try something different. I want to get them engaged and do different things. So we've also built in what we call instructor challenges as well, where you as an educator can go through and say, you know what, I want to assign some challenges. And what these challenges are ways to go through and assign out specific challenges to your students or to a class, and you can track these challenges. So you could go through and say, all right, I want to create a new challenge today. I, for instance, want to start with, maybe M&Ms for math is mine today. And I'm going to go through for the next week for all the students who work, whether it's number of mastery badges that they earn or time on task, I can track all that information as they progress through here. So if you earn 10 badges, you get your own bag of M&Ms, and you can select what targets you want, what reward badge you want, and which students you want to participate. And now once you've done that, right, now you can then track all of that as students move through here. So you're really helping incentivize some of those students. Remember, students are naturally going to be put into content or lessons that are reflective of their current skills and abilities. It's being able to take that and say, you know what, I want to build upon that and really help you celebrate the successes that you as a student have achieved. And I want to measure that as I move through this platform. Now, not only do you as an educator have the ability to track this, but so do students. So they can see in their visualization where they're at instructionally as well. So it's just a terrific way to keep your students motivated and engaged as they're moving through those learning paths. Okay, last but not least, the last thing I really want to highlight is, I've talked a lot about how we can help students and educators really streamline those processes and practices that they're working on. And from an educator's point of view, all the things that go into high quality instruction, the planning, the classroom management, all of those things, they take time. And so we really want to, as you've seen by some of the reporting and the knowledge map that we looked at, we really want to streamline some of those processes and practices and give the time back to the educator so that they can do what they do so well, which is create meaningful relationships. And we know that relationship building is really the cornerstone of good classroom management, is really the cornerstone of good classroom instruction. So to that end, we've tried to take some of those things that take educators a long time to do and make it more automated and make it faster and easier. So what we did is we created this tool called grouping. I'm partial to this, really because I know how much time I spent doing this process as a teacher. So what you can do with this is you can say, all right, today, for instance, I can group against either my Renaissance Star Assessment results, or I could say, you know what, I have my students move to my knowledge map. I want to go through today and I want to see where all of my students are at, and we'll stay on the division terrain here and say, this is where all of my students have scored on their learning path as moving on division. So here are my three groups in this case, my three math groups, the Lions, the Tigers, and the Bears, and I can see where all of my students are at instructionally. Now what I want to do is I want to create a flexible group representative of where my students are at. So instead, in the past, I would have had to take all of this data from student work, from benchmarks, from larger assessments, data assessments or otherwise, and put all that into one place. Then I would have had to go through by hand and do what you can do right now by just clicking this and saying, well, here's my groups, okay? So it seems for folks who are not educators small, but for anybody on this call who's listening who's had to go through and create flexible groups based upon student skills and abilities on even a weekly basis, right? You understand what a taxing process that is. So now if you had the ability to create flexible groups every single day and say, you know what, everybody, welcome to class. I'm posting up our math groups today. Okay, I want everyone in these groups. You not only get the opportunity then to give students content that is directly related to where they need to be, but more importantly, think about the student, right? You get to have these really cool flexible grouping models. You're not stuck in the same group. You're working with students of different skills and abilities. This permeates through your entire class. You can physically move these students too. If you're, oh, Nathan can't sit next to Maria or whatever that might be, you can move the students wherever you want as well. But it's one of those features, again, that sounds small to folks who aren't educators, but just the ability to auto-arrange, to arrange your students based upon the skill and ability with just a click of a mouse is a really, really cool thing. So we've talked a lot today about not only where students' knowledge maps work, how students work through that content in terms of learning path, but we've also talked about how you can review student results, how you can look at additional content, and then how you can keep students motivated, right? Not only through the use of teacher-graded activities, but through challenges. And then now you can see you can go beyond all of that tier 2, tier 3 differentiation and that learning path to give students even more unique experiences using this tool we call grouping. So I know that was a lot coming at the group, and I know it was a lot in a short amount of time, but I wanted to make sure that everybody here had an opportunity to go through and get an idea of precisely what is possible and what you can work on as you're going through using this tool. So using those high-quality Renaissance Star assessments that give you such great data that you can inform your instruction with, but also then take it to the next step and say, all right, I want to make sure my teachers have the opportunity to the time that it takes to provide highest quality instruction and build the most meaningful relationships with my students. And I know I want to do it in a blended learning environment. This is a tool that will help you do all of those things. Now, that being said, right, I also want to point out that we also have an excellent staff, really a world-class staff of customer success implementation consultants whose job it is to help you understand the best ways to implement this. So the luxury that I myself and that the implementation consultants have is that we get to see hundreds of schools throughout the course of a calendar year. And all of that gives us an opportunity to assemble a grouping of best practices that we can take back into your classroom, back into your district office to help you understand how to really not only maximize the use of what you got here, but also to take it to the next step and say, boy, I really want to help you understand how to interpret your data in a meaningful way, or I want to help you understand how to take the data you're getting inside of Renaissance Star assessments or the learning path and understand how I can fundamentally change the way my instructional techniques look. This is what our customer success team at Edmentum does at a high level each and every day. So by all means, you're not going to be given this content, say, oh, here you go, good luck. Our customer success team is really there to make sure that we can develop and cultivate relationships at that level and understand what your needs are and then help you understand how to get from point A to point B. So our commitment extends well beyond just helping educators and students be successful. It's really helping them understand what the best practices are moving forward. So with that, there's a lot. I know I've seen just a handful of questions come in there, and I'm sure there's more than just the questions that I saw there. So that being said, I'll probably toss it over there, Brooke, just to see really what I missed in terms of questions, or what questions maybe we can answer or help people understand a little bit better.
Yeah, we've got quite a few questions, so I'm just going to kind of jump into those now. One of the questions we had, if our students already took the STAR at the beginning of September, will you be able to use that data, or would they have to retake the STAR after we purchase ExactPath?
Great question. Nope, we can help them with, if they've already gone through and taken that STAR data, we can help them import that data into the platform.
Perfect. And then, Gretchen, this question's for you. It's referring to Renaissance Star Assessment. It came in when you were speaking. The question is 20 minutes for 34 questions on math.
Yeah, so that's true. So it's really kind of down to the learning progression. So we start asking students questions at their kind of professed grade level, and then depending on whether they answer correctly or incorrectly, we're able to move them up and down that learning progression to really start to identify what they feel comfortable with, what their true level is, and then kind of within 34 questions, or each question can you can set the time limit as the administrator. The default is about 2 minutes per question, but most people take it a little bit faster. Within about 20 minutes or so, they're able to really kind of narrow down pretty accurately to exactly where the students are and what they're ready for next.
Perfect, thank you. Next question, what if I have a fourth grader who just scored 6.3 on STAR but cannot perform fourth grade level math work? Can ExactPath be altered to go over fourth grade math skills?
That's a great question. Absolutely. So beyond just the ability for those customized or individualized learning paths, let's say that exact situation transpires and you're like, you know what, I really want to go through and edit or adjust the learning path. You have the ability to go into those individualized learning paths and edit those in any way, shape, or form you see fit. we know that, in this situation, the teacher is always right? The teacher is the person who spends the most time and knows that student the best. So we're always going to err on the side of that professional discretion as it relates to what that teacher feels. So you can absolutely go in as an educator, adjust that instructional learning path for the student to be representative of exactly what you see fit.
Perfect. And then can teachers share their class with Title I basic skills teachers so they can also see the progress in assigned work?
Absolutely. So there is no limit when you go to create classes or assemble a class of students in ExactPath. You can add as many what we call co-teachers to that class for visibility as you so choose. So, I've seen sites that say, hey, you know what, we want to make sure our title teachers have access, so we're going to create those title teachers as co-teachers so they can log in and see their specific students, progress towards IEP goals or otherwise in real time, and even be able to assign out specific levels of content beyond the learning path that they feel that needs to happen.
Great. And then when you purchase ExactPath, will you have access to math and reading, or are they purchased separately?
That's a great question. So, you can purchase them both separately and or together. So that's entirely, kind of up to you as you're going through and having those discussions with your sales partner. But that being said, I go back to what I said, more exposure is better than less. And so, working with the Edmentum team here to help you guys understand what that might look like at your site, that's exactly what we'd like to do. So if you have those questions, by all means, reach out to us and we'd be more than happy to walk you through those.
Great. And then will this work with Renaissance Enterprise?
That's a terrific question. So right now, where we're currently at, it works with Renaissance Reading and with Renaissance Math and Early Literacy. In terms of Enterprise, we are working on developing additional features or functionality that might correlate to that. So if you need more information or want, in terms of where we're at from a timeline perspective, by all means, reach out to us and we'll make sure we get into contact and give you a better idea of when we're there.
Perfect. And then we have another question. Am I correct in understanding that ExactPath automatically assigns activities as the child moves along the path?
That's exactly right. Yep, you're exactly right. And so it not only assigns lessons or activities through the learning path, but like we looked at a little bit earlier, it even takes the step further and creates those building block activities, which are, in a sense, tier 3 differentiation techniques, because it can also automatically give content that's, a skill or several skills lower than where they're currently at. They need that, or they demonstrate that they need that. So you were exactly right. It does that in a variety of ways to make sure students get the exact appropriate content that they need to be successful.
Great. And then is ExactPath available for high school?
That's a good question. So that's a really good question. So we have a couple of ways we can address that. We have content, like I mentioned, that not only goes from kindergarten all the way up to 9th grade. And we do have sites that do utilize this tool at a high school level if they feel like they have students who are saying, oh, I really do need content for my students, and for whatever reason, if it's a special education situation or otherwise. We do allow students that do 12th grade to integrate and take this the STAR reading scores to drive that learning path. That being said, we really want to make sure, if you want to do that or have interest in doing that we talk with you and get a really deep understanding of precisely the way you want to utilize this, so that we give you the best implementation possible. We do have sites to do this, but those are situations that we really like to have a conversation with to understand, okay, what are your goals for this use? How can we make sure you get exactly what you need, and that your students are getting the content they need to be successful?
Great. We had a few more questions kind of referring to more information and quotes and stuff like that. And I do know we are over time, and I know how valuable an educator's time is. So I'm going to wrap this up. If we did not get to your question, we will be emailing you. But I just wanted to remind everyone that we will be sending out a recording to this tomorrow via email, and you are more than welcome to share that with anyone else on your staff. And I know a couple of you guys have asked. I will include a link to download the slides that we had today, so you will be able to access those as well. So I'd like to thank Gretchen and Tony for that great presentation. We're very excited that you guys were able to join us today, and we hope that you enjoyed the presentation, and we do look forward to seeing you on a future webinar. We hope you all have a wonderful day.